First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak here today. Looking forward to the rest of the week. I was also a little horrified when I saw that I was speaking after David. He's a tough act to follow. Today I'm going to be talking about early Canadian readers of Thomas D'Arcy McGee and offering a case study in Irish-Canadian book history, 1845 to 1935. For the sake of economy, I will limit introductory remarks about my methodology to remarking that the approach followed here draws from both print cultural or book historical and literary critical approaches, while answering Gerald Friesen's call for attention to what he terms the plain people of Canada. First, I have approached the bibliographic remains of the eventually middle-class St. John, New Brunswick, Irish-Canadian family of Bernard, Patrick, and Edward James Mooney from the point of view of Robert Darnton's now famous paradigm of the communications circuit, a model of analysis drawing on both economic and cultural materialist theories of interpretation. Also, the following will provide some critical analysis of intertextual and literary historical features of the subject text. I've noted marginalia, underscoring, and other indications or residuum of affect represented in the surviving remnants of the Mooney Library. And I've also considered physical aspects of these books as cultural artifacts. In this case, a rich field for interpretation given the bibliophile tendencies of three generations of the family, including the decoration of Irish-related books with emerald green, orange, and scarlet ribbons. In a sense, the following remarks initiate analysis of what is now a phantom or ghost library. In 2004, the breaking up of the remains of the Mooney household at 16 Queen Street, just above Prince William Street in central St. John, led to a used book scout's acquisition of several cartons of mixed books, formerly the property of later descendants of the Mooney family. Initially, I'd planned to bring some of these books here, but it seemed like calls to Newcastle, so I did bring one or two if anybody's interested. Some of these books were discarded and lost, and the book scout, also a collector with Irish interests, damaged many of the books by partially removing Edward Mooney's book plates and obscuring and effacing signatures and inscriptions. When Edward Mooney inherited the collection of Irish books from his father Patrick, he elaborately signed all of those that appear to be connected with the original New Brunswick family library from the 1860s in a florid hand, although he later covered several of these signatures with his unfortunately undistinguished bookplate. Subsequently, the books were offered to Mr. David Schutz, a prominent St. John bookseller and antiquarian, who acquired several boxes of Mooney books, including the bulk of the early Irish materials that together form a revealing selection of scarce imprints by Thomas D'Arcy McGee, Daniel Falloon, Sir Jonah Barrington, Thomas Fawnin, Henry Grattan, and including an 1857 first edition of Edward Hayes's wonderful two-volume song collection, The Ballads of Ireland. This specimen decorated with both Bernard Mooney's emerald ribbons and his grandson Edward Mooney's bookplate. Other miscellaneous imprints from the collection, including some Irish-related books, school texts, and juvenile history and fiction, were sold on to Loyalist Coin and Bookshop in St. John. Over the past several years, I have managed to recover many of these books, and Mr. Schutz has been very helpful in allowing me to study and photograph other volumes unrelated to my interests or beyond my resources. The books represent at least 3 and probably 4 generations of Irish-Canadian reading, providing the basis for a revealing book historical case study. The following will discuss some of the main features of the residuum of the library and offer interpretation both of the significance of this print to reconstruction of the thought of average Irish-Canadian readers of the 1850 to 1930 period, and to print cultural analysis of Irish-Canadian book culture in general. I start with the collection of Patrick James Mooney, who was born in 1851 and died in 1918. Little information about the early Canadian generations of the working-class Mooney family survives. Like his wife Mary Doyle, Patrick James Mooney was a native of County Derry, having arrived in New Brunswick from Londonderry in late April 1862 at the age of 11. Patrick Mooney's grandfather, Thomas Mooney, who was born in 1822 and died in 1890, an Irish Catholic, came to St. John with his family on the ship Elizabeth, a vessel of the Londonderry J.J. Cook line. With him were his adult son Bernard, daughter-in-law Sarah Crilly Mooney, and their 3 boys, Patrick James, Michael Francis, and Edward. the family eventually settling at 710 Orange Street in a mixed neighborhood in South End, St. John. The Elizabeth made 8 trips carrying immigrants between Ireland and St. John between 1857 and 1863, and by 1860 was carrying as many as 200 immigrants, although earlier crossings were made with as few as 19. Both Thomas and Bernard Mooney were originally semi-skilled labourers employed in the building trade, and one or both may have worked for a time in the north of England. In the early 1870s, Bernard founded the firm of Bernard Mooney and Sons, General Contractors, a business that continued until Edward James Mooney's retirement in 1931. Bernard Mooney also came to own an extensive brickyard in Fairville, New Brunswick, eventually becoming one of the foremost builders in the city. A period in New Brunswick history that has been characterized by Scott C. and some others as a time of intense bigotry, conflict, and orange extremism. The Mooney firm involvement in projects for Government Customs House, Intercolonial Railway, and both the Methodist and Baptist churches, as well as the Orange Lodge itself, evidences instead the generally non-sectarian character of the St. John construction business during this time at least. It is almost certain that Patrick Mooney inherited at least part of the Library of Irish Books from his father or grandfather, although neither left their signatures in the specimens that have survived. The earliest books in the collection are Sir Jonah Barrington's Rise and Fall of the Irish Nation, issued with an 1845 New York imprint by the important Catholic Irish-Canadian publishers Dennis and James Sadler. Thomas D'Arcy McGee's historical sketches of O'Connell and his friends, produced in the same year by the Boston Irish firm Donohoe and Rowan, and Daniel Owen Madden's 1853 edition of Henry Grattan's Speeches and Letter on the Union, produced by James Duffy's Dublin Press at 7 Wellington Quay. The specimen of the Madden book is interesting in that it features the signature of D., probably Douglas, Montague Baird, a member of an aristocratic family with connections in Sunderland and Newcastle. The book also contains a stamp from the Hugh Pattinson Felling Chemical Works Workman's Library and an Edward Mooney signature, which makes it likely that the Mooney family, or at least part of it, spent time in Sunderland before leaving Britain for British America. If so, they may well have lived at Pattinson Town, the company village for workers at the Felling Chemical Works. The book shows signs of extensive use and is in a battered state, thumb and fingerprints and water stains throughout. The book includes early green and scarlet ribbon bookmarks associated with most of the surviving volumes that belonged to the family in the early period after their arrival in St. John. Grattan's closely printed and lengthy speeches from the early 1780s through to 1819 on such subjects as the Declaration of Irish Rights, Catholic rights, the Corn Laws, and anti-Jacobin war are still very instructive and make very good reading, and they would have provided much towards an informed Irish nationalist political education. A 20th century signature of Edward Mooney confirms that the book was preserved and used for more than half a century. With the copy of Madden's Grattan, another book in the collection that is likely to have been brought from Ireland by Patrick's father or grandfather is a stray first volume of James Will's 6-volume Lives of Illustrious Irishmen, a Dublin imprint of the Edinburgh firm A. Fullerton, printed in 1847. The first volume includes Will's scholarly introduction and the section of the biographical encyclopedia that deals with the earliest period of recorded Irish history, including extensive materials on legends relating to the ancient Irish figures who later figure prominently in the works of the Irish Revival by such figures as William Butler Yeats, Lady Gregory, and Douglas Hyde. Patrick Mooney's repeated use of green and red ribbons for bookmarks for Irish books seems to indicate patriotic political and cultural sentiments. And the possibility that the use of colours was accidental or purely decorative or seasonal is contradicted by the fact that the Irish books in the library were acquired over time and various fabrics were used for the green ribbons, including one with a Northern Irish green, white and black pattern in a very interesting and scarce copy of the third edition of Thomas D'Arcy McGee's historical sketches of O'Connell and his friends, and by another similar ribbon of orange and green in a copy of McGee's Catholic History, bound in orange cloth. Later, Patrick's son Edward would use orange and green ribbons in his books, though in politics the younger Mooney developed into a liberal imperialist with strong interest in labour politics.